The wind howled like a dying beast over the craggy hills of County Offaly, Ireland, carrying with it the whispers of old stories, of shadows that stretched long into the past. Atop a hill, silhouetted against a bruised and brooding sky, stood Leap Castle, a dark, hulking figure against the twilight. The stones of its walls were ancient, stained with moss and time, and beneath those stones, deeper than the earth itself, lay secrets that were not meant to be unearthed. Inside, the castle was cold, colder than it had any right to be. The kind of cold that crept into your bones and sat there, gnawing. The corridors were long and narrow, twisting like serpents through the heart of the building. The air smelled of damp and dust, of decay. At the far end of the hall, in a small, dimly lit chamber, sat a woman named Emily O'Brien. She had come here, drawn by a fascination that had plagued her for years. An obsession, really. Her grandmother had whispered to her of Leap Castle when she was a child, of the horrors that had taken place here, of the things that walked these halls in the dead of night. Now, she wanted to see for herself. The locals had tried to warn her. "It's cursed," they had said, eyes wide with fear. "There are things there, things that don't rest, things that don't forgive." But Emily had laughed it off, a nervous laugh that barely covered her growing unease. She didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But as she sat in that dark chamber, the air thick with silence, she could feel it, a presence. It was as if the castle itself was watching her, waiting. The fire in the hearth flickered and died, leaving her in near darkness. Emily shivered and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The shadows seemed to close in around her, and the castle's stones groaned softly, like a giant awakening from a long slumber. She heard it then. A faint sound, barely more than a whisper. A rustling like the movement of a long gown across a stone floor. Her heart quickened, her breath caught in her throat. She stood, listening. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling, echoing down the empty hallways. There was no answer, just the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. She stepped out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing through the castle's winding halls. The air was thick, oppressive, as if it held its breath, waiting for something, anything. She turned a corner, and that's when she saw it. A figure standing in the shadows at the far end of the corridor. Tall, thin, with a dark cloak that seemed to flow around it like smoke. For a moment, Emily thought it might be her imagination, a trick of the dim light, but then it moved. A soft, whispering sigh filled the air, and the figure drifted closer. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She could see it now, a woman, her face pale, her eyes dark and hollow, her mouth twisted into a grimace of pain. Her dress was tattered, stained with something dark, blood. Emily's mind raced. This was not a living person. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the air seemed to bend around her, in the cold that seeped deeper and deeper into her flesh. The woman stopped a few feet away, her eyes boring into Emily's with a terrible intensity. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice thin and reedy like the wind through a cracked window. "Why do you disturb the dead?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry, her body frozen in place. "I wanted to know," she stammered, "to understand what happened here." The woman's face twisted into a smile, but it was a smile without warmth, without humanity. "You do not want to know?" she hissed. "This place is cursed. It holds the souls of the damned, and they do not forgive, they do not forget." The shadows seemed to deepen around her, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The woman stepped closer, her feet not quite touching the ground, her movements fluid, unnatural. "Leave this place," she whispered, her breath cold against Emily's cheek. "Leave before it's too late." And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The corridor was empty, the shadows still and quiet. Emily stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had come looking for ghosts and she had found them. Or perhaps they had found her. She turned, her footsteps quick and uneven, her mind racing. She needed to get out. But the castle's halls seemed longer now, more twisted, more confusing. The walls closed in around her, the darkness thickening, pressing against her. She could hear whispers, faint and distant, like voices carried on the wind. She began to run, her footsteps echoing wildly in the empty halls. She turned corner after corner, each one leading to another endless hallway. Panic set in, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt the walls closing in around her, felt the cold seep deeper into her skin. And then she saw it again, the woman in the shadows. Closer this time, her face twisted into a mask of anger, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. "You should not have come," she said, her voice echoing through the stone walls. "Now, you will never leave." Emily stumbled backward, her back hitting the cold stone of the wall. The woman advanced, her steps slow and deliberate, her eyes never leaving Emily's face. "This is my place," she whispered, her voice growing louder, harsher. "My pain, my torment, my prison." Emily's vision blurred, her head spinning. She felt the weight of the castle pressing down on her, the shadows creeping closer. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the stone floor. She could hear the woman's laughter behind her, cold and cruel, echoing through the dark corridors. The walls seemed to twist and warp, the air growing colder, thicker. She turned a corner and stopped, her heart freezing in her chest. There, standing before her, was a dark, gaping doorway. The entrance to the oubliette, the infamous hole in the floor where, centuries ago, prisoners had been thrown to die, to be forgotten by the world above. She could feel a pull, a dark energy seeping from the opening, a cold that seemed to reach out and grab her. The laughter grew louder, and she felt something cold brush against her back. "Stay with us," the voice whispered, now behind her, right next to her ear. "Join us in the dark." Emily's scream pierced the night, and then there was silence. The wind outside howled against the castle walls, and the shadows deepened, closing in around her. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells rang, their mournful chime lost in the gathering storm, and Leap Castle stood as it always had, watching, waiting, its dark secrets hidden in the shadows, its ghostly inhabitants ever restless, ever hungry for another soul to keep them company in the eternal night.